Hi there, and welcome once again to the Explaining History video channel. One of the things that I've been talking about with a lot of my students recently, and I've had a lot of inquiries about, is historiography. What it is, what it's for, why we bother with it, and what we can do with it. So I'm going to try to go through a lot of those little issues here, and hopefully at the end of this video, if you're watching it and you're doing coursework or essays that require understanding historiography, it'll make things a little bit clearer and make you a little more inclined to actually use it. So, if you take any topic in the world, from civil rights to the Holocaust to the rise and fall of the British Empire, take your pick. You can almost guarantee that somebody somewhere has written a book about it, and somebody somewhere has added to the argument and the way in which we think about the subject. And if you're writing on one of these issues, you are, in some tiny, tiny way, contributing to that discussion. You might be saying things that have already been said before. You might possibly be saying something completely new, depending on how much evidence you've read and that kind of thing. So, one of the reasons why you need to acknowledge historiography in your essays, particularly if it's a longer essay or a piece of coursework where you actually have to include a little kind of section on historiography, is you need to show that you understand the debate that's already been had. Why? Well, because there's nothing as frustrating or irritating as somebody coming to you with information you already know. Imagine that you're having a conversation with a friend. A conversation has progressed quite a long way. You've covered many topics and you've discussed a particular idea until it's become very sophisticated. Then some passing oaf blunders into the conversation and starts right from the beginning again, saying things that are very obvious and have already been resolved and accepted or ignored or discounted. You don't want that. So if we were to take, for example, the issue of the Holocaust, there's a huge canon of knowledge already on this subject. There's probably more books written on the Holocaust than anyone in their lifetime has got time to read, except for, of course, perhaps scholars that specialise on the subject. But there are certain schools of thought which have largely been pushed to one side because new evidence strongly suggests that they're not really valid anymore. Particularly, I'm talking about the intentionalist school of thought, when it comes to looking at the Holocaust. And very briefly, the intentionalists argued that Hitler had a master plan from about 1918 onwards, and the evidence really doesn't support that at all now. So if you were looking at a question on the Holocaust and you wanted to show that you had a sound understanding, you'd make this point. You'd include a little historiographical passage saying that initially, here, this school of thought, the intentionalist school of thought, was considered to be valid. Then another school of thought, called the functionalists, they came along with new evidence, new ideas, and really just sort of swept the old ideas away, and nobody pays them much heed. And finally, there are kind of almost post-functionalists, synthesists, as they call themselves, who now take together a number of different disciplines and a number of different interpretations and create an entirely new model. So, without going into it, and don't got the time to discuss the Holocaust from start to finish, we could say initially, idea A was considered valid, then idea B was considered valid. Finally, idea C has supplanted all of these, and now I will, in my essay, look at this question and perhaps build on idea C or reappraise idea B. And by doing that, by knowing what the debate has already been, it gives you an awful lot of power to explore and discuss these arguments. But because if you don't do that, all you're doing is regurgitating the narrative. You're telling the facts. The examiner already knows that, and by and large doesn't care. The examiner will give you probably about a maximum of about 40% for knowledge, and 60% of everything you do has to come from exploring, appraising, dissecting, and saying pretty much interesting and clever things about the arguments that you've heard, and proposing arguments of your own, explanations of your own. This is where, as a historian, you have to be.